In the middle of a raging snowstorm, a powerful man stopped his car for a reason he never expected. Michael Bennett, a millionaire CEO, thought his life had been emptied of miracles long ago. But on that frozen night, he found a little girl lying helpless in the snow, her tiny hand clutching his shirt as if he were her last hope. What began as a chance encounter quickly turned into something far greater, a battle for survival, for truth, and for the kind of love that can heal even the deepest scars. This is not just a story about a storm. It is about second chances, about choosing courage when the world doubts you, and about how one broken man and one terrified child found family in the most unlikely place. Stay with us, and if you believe in the power of miracles, subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories today. The night was a blur of white, a storm so heavy that even the mountains seemed to vanish behind the curtain of snow. Michael Bennett gripped the steering wheel tighter, his Tesla's headlights carving only a narrow tunnel of light in front of him. Each mile of the empty road pressed heavier on his chest. On nights like this, silence felt like an enemy. For years, since the accident that took his daughter, silence had lived inside him, curling around his heart like frost that never thawed. The passenger seat beside him gleamed untouched, a painful reminder of the little girl whose laughter no longer filled his home. He should have stayed in the city, maybe even lingered at the gala, forcing polite smiles and shallow conversation. But Michael had long since grown weary of rooms filled with champagne and empty promises. The storm outside felt truer than the shallow warmth inside those gilded halls. So he drove home, chasing solitude, even if that solitude sometimes threatened to consume him. The wipers struggled against the endless flakes, thudding back and forth as if beating time against his own restless thoughts. Every so often, a memory crept in uninvited, golden hair catching sunlight, a small voice singing along to the radio, the soft weight of a child asleep in the backseat. He blinked hard as if he could push the memory away, but grief had a way of living in the smallest shadows. The road narrowed as he climbed higher toward Aspen Ridge. His chest ached with a familiar heaviness, but tonight it seemed different, sharper, as though the storm itself had forced its way inside him. Then he saw it, at first just a smear of darkness against the white, lying dangerously close to the guardrail. He slowed instinctively, pulse quickening. The shape was too small to be anything but a child. Michael's breath caught. He braked hard, tires sliding against the icy pavement before catching. For a moment, disbelief held him frozen, but then instinct took over. He shoved the car into park and flung open the door, cold air slicing through him like a blade. "Hello," he shouted against the wind, his voice nearly lost in the storm. No reply. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stumbled forward, heart thundering. The closer he came, the more dread coiled in his gut. A little girl, maybe 8 years old, lay curled against the rail, her arms locked around her knees, her hair tangled with ice. She wore only a thin jacket, no hat, no gloves. Her lips were pale, edged in blue. Her eyes barely opened when he knelt beside her. Michael dropped to his knees, panic gripping him harder than the cold. For years he had imagined what it might feel like to hold his daughter again, even in dreams. Now, with this child before him, fragile and fatting, the old grief came roaring back. He reached for her, terrified she would not respond. At his touch, her body flinched weakly, a breath escaping in a shallow cloud. Relief and terror mingled inside him. "Hey," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You're going to be all right. I've got you." Without thinking, he stripped off his coat and wrapped it around her trembling body. She felt so light, too light, as though the storm might carry her away if he loosened his grip. When he lifted her, her head sagged against his chest. But then, against all odds, he felt her tiny fingers clutch at his shirt. That fragile grasp pierced him deeper than anything had in years. It was not just fear, it was trust. In that desperate moment, Michael felt something inside him shatter and stir all at once. The numbness that had ruled his life cracked beneath the simple weight of her touch. He hurried back to the car, cradling her against him as if she were the most precious thing he had ever carried. Sliding into the driver's seat, he pulled her closer to the heater, fumbling for his phone with trembling hands. The words barely made it past his lips as he dialed 911. "This is Michael Bennett. I found a child. She's hypothermic, unresponsive. I'm driving to St. Catherine's Hospital, 5 minutes out." He did not wait for a reply. Every second mattered. As the car sped forward, Michael murmured words he had not spoken in over a decade. "Hold on, sweetheart. Just hold on." Snow blurred against the windshield, the world collapsing into white and shadow. Michael risked a glance at the girl in his arms. Her face was too pale, lips trembling. And then, in a voice so faint it nearly broke him, she whispered, "Please, don't let him find me." Michael stiffened. The words carried more weight than the storm itself. Fear flickered in her gray eyes, fear deeper than the cold. He swallowed hard, driving faster, chasing the glow of hospital lights in the distance. The car skidded into the emergency bay. Nurses rushed out, their urgent shouts clashing with the storm. Michael stumbled after them as they lifted her from his arms. The last thing he saw was her small hand reaching back for him before disappearing behind the swinging doors. Snow whipped around him as he stood there, breath fogging in the air, heart pounding as if it would tear free from his chest. For a long moment he felt the storm echo inside him, but something else lived there now too. Something raw, something alive. The storm outside howled, but within Michael Bennett a new fire had been lit. He did not know who she was or what darkness she was running from, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would not walk away, not this time. The waiting room smelled faintly of antiseptic and stale coffee. Michael sat rigid in the hard plastic chair, his hands trembling in his lap. Beyond the glass doors, the storm raged against the hospital windows, rattling the frames like an unrelenting reminder that the world outside was still hostile and cold. Inside, everything felt suspended, every second stretching longer than the last. He had handed the little girl over to the nurses less than half an hour ago, but it felt as if entire years had passed. He could still feel her weight in his arms, light as air, and the desperate clutch of her fingers against his shirt. That grip haunted him. A reminder of the daughter he lost, and the aching possibility that he might be given another chance to save someone. Doctors rushed past, voices sharp and urgent. He caught fragments of their words: severe hypothermia, IV warming, possible trauma. Each phrase tightened the knot in his stomach. He pressed his fists against his knees until his knuckles blanched white, trying to ground himself in the sterile rhythm of the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. When the automatic doors slid open again, it was not a nurse but two police officers who entered. Their uniforms brought a weight of authority that immediately filled the room. The taller man introduced himself as Detective Ethan Ross, his partner as Officer Julia Price. Their tone was professional, but there was something in their eyes, a flicker of suspicion Michael could not miss. They asked him to recount what had happened. He explained everything as clearly as he could, leaving the gala, driving through the storm, seeing the small figure by the roadside, stopping to find the girl half buried in snow, rushing her here. His words stumbled in places, his voice cracking as he described the state she was in. The officers scribbled notes, testing each detail against the possibility of deception. Michael understood the reality of it. A wealthy man, single and alone, had arrived at a hospital with a battered, unidentified child. It did not matter that he had saved her life. Appearances could twist the truth into suspicion. "Did you know the girl before tonight?" Officer Price asked, her tone carefully neutral. "No," Michael answered quickly, his throat tight. "I swear I have never seen her before. She was alone, freezing. She told me not to let him find her. She was terrified." The officers exchanged a glance but did not comment. Detective Ross closed his notepad with a quiet snap. "We will check for any missing child reports in the area. In the meantime, social services will want to speak with you. You did the right thing bringing her in." The words should have been reassuring, but Michael felt no relief. His gaze drifted back toward the ER doors, half expecting them to swing open with news, good or bad, that would change everything. It was not long before a woman with a hospital badge approached him. She introduced herself as Dana Morse from Child Protective Services. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of protocol. "Until we determine her situation, you cannot have unsupervised contact," she explained. "I know that is difficult." Michael nodded stiffly. Rules made sense on paper, but they felt cruel when the child behind those doors had clung to him as though he were her last safe harbor. "Will she be all right?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. Dana hesitated. "She is stable. The next few hours are critical, but she is strong. Most children in her situation are not found in time. She was lucky." The truth of that statement pressed down on him with unbearable weight. Lucky. He had found her by chance, a smudge of darkness on a road he might easily have ignored. If he had looked away, if he had chosen to keep driving, she might have disappeared into the storm forever. The hours bled together in a haze of waiting. His lawyer, Alice Grant, arrived, sharp-eyed and protective, ensuring every question asked of him was answered fairly. The chaplain stopped by with kind words that barely registered. All Michael could hear was the sound of his own heartbeat, syncing with the faint echo of the girl's voice in his memory. "Please do not let him find me." When the nurse finally appeared, it was nearly midnight. "She is asking for you, Mr. Bennett." Michael stood so fast his chair toppled behind him. His chest hammered as he followed the nurse through a maze of white corridors until they reached the pediatric ICU. He braced himself before stepping inside, but nothing could have prepared him for the sight. The little girl lay curled on her side, wrapped in blankets, her small arms tangled with IV lines. Her hair was still damp, matted with melted snow, but her eyes, wide, gray, shimmering with fear, locked onto him the instant he entered. Michael froze, remembering Dana's warning about supervised contact. He began to turn away, but the girl's hand lifted, trembling, and caught the cuff of his sleeve. Her fingers curled into the fabric with desperate strength. He sank to his knees beside the bed, careful not to touch her more than she allowed. "Hey there," he whispered, his throat tight. "You are safe now, I promise." Tears welled in her eyes as her lips quivered. "Please do not let him take me. Please do not make me go back." The nurse in the corner glanced at Michael, her expression softening with a silent permission to stay. Michael gently squeezed the girl's hand. "No one is taking you anywhere tonight," he murmured. "I am here. You are not alone." For the first time in a decade, the emptiness inside him shifted. Sitting by this child's bedside, he felt a bond settle into place, fragile, unspoken, but undeniable. He read to her from a children's book someone had left nearby, his voice low and steady. Each word felt like a vow, a promise to protect, to fight for her. As she drifted between wakefulness and sleep, she never let go of his sleeve. Every time her grip slackened, she caught hold again, as though she feared he might vanish if she released him. Michael's chest ached with the weight of that trust. When the social worker returned later, she asked simple questions. The girl's name, Leia, her age, 8, whether she remembered what happened. Her answers were whispered, broken, sometimes no louder than a breath. "I was running. He was mad. He said Mommy was gone because of me." Michael clenched his fists, forcing himself to keep his expression gentle. Rage boiled beneath the surface, but above all was determination. Whatever darkness this child had fled, he would not let it swallow her again. That night, as the storm quieted beyond the hospital walls, Michael sat in the glow of the ICU lamp, watching Leia breathe. He realized that his life had already changed. It was no longer defined by loss, but by the fragile hand gripping his sleeve and the promise he had made. She would never be alone again. The hospital hallways carried a constant hum, the steady rhythm of footsteps and beeping monitors echoing against sterile walls. Outside, the storm that had nearly taken Leia's life still lingered, pressing its cold weight against the glass. But inside room 314, time seemed to slow into something fragile and intimate. Michael sat by her side, watching the rise and fall of her chest, his presence a silent promise that she was no longer alone. In those quiet hours, the world outside turned suspicious. Whispers spread through Aspen Ridge, twisting Michael's rescue into questions of motive. Some called him a hero, while others eyed him with doubt. Suspicious of a man with wealth and a tragic past suddenly tied to a vulnerable child. Reporters lingered outside the hospital, feeding on the uncertainty. Michael felt the weight of judgment, but every time he looked at Leia, her bruised arms, her wary eyes, her small hand reaching instinctively for his sleeve, he knew the truth lived here, not in gossip. The bond between them deepened with each passing day. In the mornings, he brought her small comforts, a pair of warm socks, a teddy bear with a crooked ribbon. She accepted them with a gratitude that broke his heart, hugging the bear as though it were a shield against the world. Her voice was barely more than a whisper when she said thank you, but in her eyes Michael saw something shift, the faintest flicker of trust. Detective Corinne Fields took over the investigation, her calm and compassionate presence a welcome balance to the chaos. Alongside her, social worker Tara Evans began to observe the fragile connection between Michael and Leia. They noticed what Michael himself had barely dared to believe, that this girl, who had every reason to mistrust, found safety in him. Her shoulders loosened when he entered, her gaze lingered on his hands, and when fear threatened to overwhelm her, she reached for him as though he were an anchor. The case against Ray Mallory grew darker with every discovery. Old reports of suspected abuse had been buried, neighbors recalled nights of shouting, and the autopsy of Leia's mother revealed signs of violence long overlooked. The picture was no longer one of tragedy, but of cruelty carefully hidden. Michael's private investigator, David Palmer, uncovered trails of money and connections that suggested corruption within the sheriff's office itself. Each new piece of evidence strengthened the truth Michael already carried in his heart. Leia was not safe with Ray, and she never had been. The fragile peace inside the hospital shattered when Ray himself appeared, demanding to see his stepdaughter. His voice carried down the corridor before he even entered the room, harsh and arrogant. When he burst through the doorway, Leia recoiled, color draining from her face. Michael stood without hesitation, positioning himself between her and the man who had caused so much pain. "She is not going anywhere with you," Michael said, his voice steady, low, immovable. Ray sneered, spitting venomous words about wealth and privilege, about a stranger interfering where he did not belong. But Michael did not waver. The room filled with tension until security and Detective Fields intervened, forcing Ray out under the sharp promise of criminal investigation. Still, the damage lingered. Leia sobbed quietly afterward, trembling against Michael's side, but he held her gently, whispering that she was safe now. For the first time, she seemed to believe it. The days that followed were a blur of preparation and fear. Court was scheduled, an emergency hearing to decide custody. Alice Grant, Michael's lawyer, warned him of the battle ahead. Ray's team would attack his character, twist his grief into weakness, and paint his actions as dangerous obsession. Michael listened, jaw tight, knowing she was right. But his resolve did not falter. He was ready to face whatever storm waited in that courtroom. When the day came, gray clouds hung low over the courthouse, as though the storm itself had followed them. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward, questions shouted above the wind. Michael shielded Leia with his body as they entered, her small hand clutching his with desperate strength. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Ray sat across the room, his cheap suit barely disguising the fury in his eyes. His lawyer spoke first, painting Michael as unstable, a grieving man projecting his loss onto a stranger's child. They twisted his rescue into suspicion, his kindness into something sinister. Michael sat motionless, holding Leia's hand beneath the table, refusing to give their lies power. Then it was Alice's turn. Calm and precise, she laid out the truth. The roadside rescue, the medical evidence of abuse, the reports buried by corrupt officials, the attempted break-in at the hospital. Each fact built upon the last until the case against Ray loomed undeniable. But the true turning point came when Leah herself was called to the stand. She walked slowly, shoulders trembling but her chin lifted with fragile courage. The courtroom hushed as she spoke, her small voice carrying more weight than any lawyer's argument. She spoke of nights filled with fear, of being blamed for her mother's death, of hiding in closets when Ray's anger boiled over. And then, with tears streaking her face, she said, "Michael found me in the snow. He did not hurt me. He helped me. Please do not make me go back. I just want to be safe." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Even Ray's lawyer seemed to shrink under the weight of her words. Ray himself lost control, shouting and cursing until bailiffs restrained him. His fury sealed the truth more completely than any testimony. The judge's ruling was clear. Ray would face charges of abuse and obstruction, and temporary guardianship of Leah was granted to Michael Bennett. Relief flooded the room, mingled with exhaustion and quiet triumph. As they left, reporters shouted questions, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the small hand that slipped into Michael, holding on with a trust that no storm could shake. That night back in the hospital room, Michael watched Leah sleep with Buttons the bear tucked against her chest. The storm outside had finally eased, leaving only silence and the fragile glow of lamplight. For the first time in years, Michael felt not emptiness but purpose. He was not just a man surviving his own loss anymore. He was a protector, a father in the making, and Leah was no longer just a survivor. Together, they had found a fragile piece of family in the middle of the storm. There are moments in life when the world feels too heavy, when loss and loneliness make us believe that miracles belong only to stories. Michael Bennett knew that feeling better than anyone. His wealth had built him towers of glass and steel, but inside he carried only silence and grief. On that frozen night, he could never have imagined that stopping his car for a shadow in the snow would change everything. The little girl he found was not just another lost child. She was a survivor, her small body carrying scars of cold and cruelty, her fragile voice carrying the weight of fear. Yet in the middle of the storm, when her trembling fingers clutched his shirt, something awoke inside Michael, a spark that grief had not been able to extinguish. In her, he saw not only pain but also the chance to love again, the chance to protect, the chance to choose courage over despair. Their journey was not easy. The world doubted him, painted him as suspicious, whispered that a man with tragedy in his past could not possibly be trusted with someone else's child. But Michael stood firm. Every time Leah reached for his hand, every time her voice whispered that she was afraid, he answered with the same promise: "You are not alone. I will not let you go back to the darkness." In the courtroom, when the storm of lies and accusations rose around them, it was Leah's voice that cut through like sunlight breaking clouds. Her truth was simple, undeniable, and full of the courage that no child should ever be forced to carry. And when the judge placed her hand into Michael's, a fragile family was born, not out of blood, but out of choice, sacrifice, and love. What happened between Michael and Leah is more than a story. It is a reminder that sometimes the greatest miracles are not thunderous or divine. They are found in quiet promises, in the strength to stand between a child and her fear, in the courage to open a heart that has been broken. The miracle was not only that Leah survived the storm. The miracle was that two souls, both wounded, both searching, found each other and built something new. And maybe that is what all of us are searching for. The reminder that even in our darkest winters, there is a hand waiting to hold ours, a voice whispering that we are not alone. If this story has touched you, even in the smallest way, we invite you to stay with us. Because here at Hidden Echo Stories, we believe that love, kindness, and second chances still exist. Subscribe today and let your heart be reminded that miracles are not just in the past, they are happening around us, waiting to be seen.